Welcome to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, hosted by attorneys Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen.
Welcome to another edition of Life, Death, and the Law. I'm Shawn Garner, attorney with Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, in studio here with Thomas Sparks and Cody Beeson. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
So, for anybody that has traveled with me, and Thomas and Cody both have, they know I have a terrible sense of direction. I don't know what it is. I think it is hereditary because my daughter also has it. But anyway, I get lost easily. And I was talking to my son who he's in Sweden right now, and he's trying to figure out city streets of new locations each time because he gets transferred from place to place. And he says he struggles a little bit. And I go, yeah, that's a family trait.
Yeah,
That
checks out.
I passed down to you, so you're welcome. But they're like, yeah, you do really like miss your exits a lot and struggle. And I go, yeah. And you know what? If I get talking to somebody, even if I'm in town, I'll just keep driving straight. And that's the thing that happens. And I said, you know, there's one time I got lost in the forest, and I started telling the story. I realized I'd never told anybody this story before, but we went elk hunting. I'm not a hunter, and I realized why. Particularly, first of all, I'm too impatient, and I'm just not that into elk meat or any other type of wild meat, I guess. But the more specific reason was this whole bad direction thing. I went hunting with my brother and my father-in-law one time, and we separated just for a little bit. Like, we were probably within earshot of each other at all times, but I got lost. And panic set in. We were up in Williams, just above Flagstaff, Arizona. And I didn't know where I was, what I was going to do. So I fire 3 shots in the air. Yeah, it got to that point. And I hear my brother come in my direction, and we meet up. And he says, "Oh, man, I thought you got an elk. I thought you shot one."
Got 3.
Yeah.
They definitely got it by that one. Yeah.
I didn't tell him that it was
Warning shots.
warning shot. It was like, I said, yeah, I missed.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And if he's listening to this, sorry for lying to you, but I was a little embarrassed.
Yeah, keep your honor.
Exactly. Yeah, so I have bad direction. Sorry. Anyhow, we have right before us right now one thing that unifies the parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, as far as the direction of this country goes. How do you like that transition?
That was great.
And that is, both parties seem to think that tariffs are a good idea. And what I mean by tariffs, of course, is putting a tax on imports and or premium on exports. And so we protect American jobs and American industries by doing that. And at first blush, on the surface, it seems like a good idea. And I had this discussion with my wife. She's a really good person to bounce these types of ideas off of because she takes them, and I think at first, like, without any bias, really. She doesn't overanalyze it. She just says, well, you want to make Chinese steel more expensive so American workers can have good paying jobs and our steel industry can stay good and consistent? I think that sounds like a good thing. And it does. And that's why politicians consistently tout it. But I want to play this 5-minute clip from PragerU, which is a wonderful little tool to get bits of information, because they put together arguments very clearly and concisely in 5 minutes. And I want to play this, and then we'll have a little discussion, see what you guys think. So here we go. Let's play that up.
Suppose someone invented a pill that let you live to the age of 120 in perfect health and then die painlessly. That pill would put a lot of people out of business. It would be bad news for doctors and nurses. It would be catastrophic for medical insurers. It would throw millions of home care staff out of work. But would anyone see those as good reasons to ban it? And would anyone care where the pill had been invented? In their country or someone else's? What goes for that pill goes for any other product that would improve our lives. we shouldn't make things harder to obtain simply on the grounds that they originate somewhere else. Actually, a lot of people disagree with that idea. Opponents of free trade, and there are many, say things that sound perfectly reasonable. Things like, we need to protect our strategic industries. We can't survive these expanding trade deficits. We must grow our own food. We want trade to be fair. We can't compete with slave wage economies. All those arguments sound like common sense, but all of them would ban our miracle pill. All of them would leave us poorer. Let's take them in order. Protectionism. Trade barriers don't protect industries. They make them inefficient, uncompetitive, and dependent on state handouts. As Ronald Reagan put it, instead of protectionism, we should call it destructionism. It destroys jobs, weakens our industries, harms exports, costs billions of dollars to consumers, and damages our overall economy. Trade deficits? There's no correlation between a country's balance of trade and its economic growth. The greatest benefit of trade is cheaper imports, because they save consumers money that then gets spent on other stuff, which is what drives growth. If, say, China wants to subsidize its steel production, that's a gift to our construction workers, our car makers, and our consumers, courtesy of the Chinese state. Growing your own food? You know which country leads the world in that? North Korea. It has made self-sufficiency, Ju-che, its ruling principle. Yep, that's North Korea, the world's leader in man-made famines. The way to have secure food, or secure anything, is to source it from the widest possible variety of suppliers. That way you're not at risk from a shock or disruption, which might as easily happen in your own country as anywhere else. Fair trade? The only thing that's fair is not putting the government's thumb on the scales. Protectionism, by definition, privileges some politically connected lobby over the general population. The way to protect our industries is to make them more competitive. And you do that by lowering taxes and cutting regulations. Competing with lower wage economies, that's what makes poor countries richer and makes rich countries richer. Lower wages let developing nations compete and let wealthier countries focus on higher skilled, higher paying jobs. The iPhone is assembled in China, but the design and profits are in the USA. Look at the global impact. As recently as 1981, 40% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's 8%. 300 people have escaped extreme poverty since you clicked on this video. That's 300 new arguments for free trade. So, why doesn't everyone get it? The answer lies in our psychology. We didn't evolve in this world of superabundance. In our genes, we're still on the savannas of Pleistocene Africa. We feel uncomfortable if we don't have a stash of food at hand to get us through the winter. Depending on strangers to supply us with stuff we can't see just feels wrong. It is literally counterintuitive. It runs up against instincts and intuitions buried deep in our DNA. Free trade, one of the greatest blessings which a government can confer on a people, is in almost every country unpopular. So wrote the poet, historian, and Whig politician Lord Macaulay in 1824. It was true then, and it has not stopped being true in the intervening 200 years, though those years have seen our species move from the lowest barbarism to the highest opulence. Our primitive intuitions, our gut feelings, make us surprisingly impervious to evidence. But human beings are blessed with rationality, and we should use it. So let's say it out loud. Free trade is the supreme instrument of poverty alleviation, and the more prosperous a society is, the likelier it is to be more equal, more peaceful, and more concerned with the rights of the individual. If you want to sell me something, and I want to buy it from you, the government had better have a good reason to come between us. Me living in a different country, that's no reason at all. I'm Daniel Hannan, president of the Institute for Free Trade for Prager University.
I'm telling you, those are good little clips. They have dozens and dozens of them. They go through each of the founding fathers and the American presidents. They summarize their highs and lows in their presidencies. They go through historic events like Vietnam and South Korea, or the Korean War, World War II, of course, specific battles. So PragerU, a big shout out for that. It's a free, it's not actually a university. It's named after Dennis Prager, who was a great radio personality and decided to put on these tidbits to help educate our children in a way that is lacking in a lot of schools today. So that's enough about PragerU. Let's get back into the actual discussion of the argument, but we're going to take a break first. This is Life, Death, and the Law.
Coming up, more thought-provoking conversations on life, death, and the law right after this. You're listening to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, the law firm that has been voted Yuma's best 6 years in a row.
Welcome back to Life, Death, and the Law. We just heard about free trade and the comparison of having that view as opposed to imposing tariffs and protectionism. For example, making it more expensive for China to import cheap materials or products into our country and putting a tax or a tariff, which is the same thing, on those items so we can either compete here at home, or we can make other products around the world more competitive and diversify where we get our things from. That is the government putting its finger on the scale or intervening in your choice as to who you want to deal with and what products you should be able to buy. What are your thoughts on that, Cody? Now, of course, that was a very good argument against it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on either side.
I mean, I think free trade is essential. Like, we should pay the minimum amount we should. You know, go out and source from the best suppliers that you're willing to pay for. But that being said, you know, government has its hands in all types of industries and tips of scales, whether it be labor or products or whatever. More regulation is just going to cost more money.
Yeah, regulation does cost more money. I've noticed a trend when we talk about these subjects of what I would call second order effects are very hard for the common person to wrap their head around. So we'll give you a couple of analogies. You've got electric cars, for example. You know, people think when they drive an electric car, they are being good to the environment. They're not having any exhaust.
Of course they are. That's why they have clouds on their license plate.
Right, yeah. No exhaust coming out of the exhaust pipe, but they don't understand that they have to charge their car, and that power grid is supported by a coal plant. So every time they plug in their car, they're putting more burned coal into the atmosphere, and they're still doing the same effect. It's just not coming right from them. It's a second order effect, and that's kind of the same thing as tariffs. Like, in the moment,
not to mention the fact that the car takes multiple times the amount of mining and rare earth materials to make the car in the first place. And so the environmental impact to create that car compared to an internal combustion engine is much, much higher initially. You just don't see it. It's removed from your sight. So when you see that shiny car compared to an internal combustion that has got exhaust coming out the exhaust pipe, you say, oh, that's much cleaner.
Right. And now we're even talking like third order effects where I have to think a little bit deeper about, hey, how's my battery put together? How's that for the environment? And it's just a lot harder to see. And the same thing I think goes for tariffs is on its face, we say, hey, you know, we can keep jobs in America. People will get paid more in America. That's a good thing. But look at the second order effect. Your iPhone's going to go triple in price because American labor is more expensive than, let's say, Chinese labor. The second thing would be like minimum wage. It feels really good to get $18 an hour and get 3 times as much as you were used to. But then you go to the grocery store and see that the eggs are 3 times more expensive now.
Right.
And that's the second order effect you don't consider.
And the rent is astronomical. What you pay for a single bedroom apartment in California, you could be making a mortgage payment on a 3-bedroom house. Cody, I'm not really surprised at all about your viewpoint on this because you're very heavily leaning libertarian.
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Is that true or not?
I mean, I'm a Republican, but at the end of the day, I just want to be left alone, and I think
If libertarians were a real, actual party that had any influence, which
yeah, probably.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not trying to push you that.
No, I mean, let's
I
just be honest.
Your viewpoints, and to be honest, I would be too. I think I align more with the libertarian view than I do any of the parties in power right now.
And I guess I've just been so disgusted when seeing the Republicans have been in power and they've washed it away. They've left it. They've left solutions to go away because of political reasons, political gain.
Right.
And stop playing politics. Let's just get down to it.
So here's my viewpoint on it, and let's bring up some of the arguments against it, which my wife brought up right away. We want to support 4-year-olds laboring in Vietnam to put together our shoes. Is that what you want? Or should we have a government that intervenes and says, "Oh no, that's not humane. So we're going to put a tariff on those products and make it more competitive for people here in the United States that we can see are being treated humanely, or other countries that have more regulations that treat their populations more fairly." And I said, I don't like the thought of 4-year-olds sewing all day, 12 hours a day in a sweatshop. That's a terrible thing.
Yeah, their skills aren't there.
Here's another thing.
I'm sorry. They should be mining. They should be coal mining, like we used to have them doing.
So my other thought was, well, why are the 4-year-olds doing this? Why are their parents choosing to send them there? Is it the government that goes and harvests all these 4-year-olds, which very well may be? I don't know. I don't live in China. I don't live in these other countries, Vietnam, if it's the case there. I don't know how the 4-year-olds are getting to these companies, but nonetheless, there is some act that perpetuates them there. And yes, it may not be the 4-year-old's choice, but it's somebody's choice to do it. And so what happens to that individual? Somebody's getting better off for doing it, and it's not just Nike, right? It's somebody there. It's a parent that might see that their family would starve to death without the entire family contributing. I don't know what it is, but my argument was, if the 4-year-old had a better alternative, the parents probably would select it for them. I don't know that the families that are sending the 4-year-olds to it are confined and in jail and are just able to send their children out to do this labor. Now that, I know it's a very harsh reality, and it's a difficult one to put your head around, but maybe that 4-year-old is helping lift their family out of poverty, and then their younger brother or sister can go to school and get an education and not have to work in the factory, either just one sibling down or even the next generation down. So that's one concept of it. What I do know is we should rely on the media. I was a political science major and preached a lot that the media was the fourth pillar of the government, that we could not exist as a free society without a unimpeded media. And that's why the First Amendment was so important, is because the media needed to be there to keep that checks and balances on the government. Now, the media has been corrupted over the time. Maybe it was corrupt already at the time and I didn't know about it. But if the media explained where our products were being sourced from and the conditions in which they were being built, then the individuals that were consuming them could make choices about that.
And we have. Remember Kathy Lee Giffords?
Yes.
And the sweatshops?
Yes.
The market decided they didn't want to participate in child slave labor.
Right.
And that turned around.
We see the same thing with wokeism. Nobody's saying that the government ought to kill the idea of wokeism. What we are saying is, let's educate everybody as to what it is actually, and when companies participate in that ideology and perpetuate it, then let the market decide as to whether or not we want to adopt that. And we saw what happened to Bud Light, we saw what happened to Target, and that's the market deciding. I think that companies ought to have free choice, just as an individual, to express their opinions on political views, and the government ought to stay out of that altogether, but the people ought to know and vote with their wallets.
Yeah, I think that child labor is going to continue whether or not the U.S. buys into it or not. Now, I don't mean that to say that, let's just get our piece of the pie while we can, but there aren't any shortcuts when it comes to like building a country's economy. And people who live in first world countries like we do in this country, it's easier for us to say, oh, how terrible. But our country went through the same thing.
Yeah, we experienced it.
We're just on the upper end now, and we have the blessing of being in America at this time. But those countries have to go through a natural process of entering the second and first world so that they can have a stable economy. If you put your thumb on the scale, like America seems to like to do, in order to benefit us or another country, it artificially does it, and that can't last. It has to be a natural progression.
Yeah, one very good example of that is what's going on in California right now. In California, there was something called Proposition 13. And what it did is it limited the amount that California could raise property taxes because property values were going up so fast because they were raising minimum wages. And so minimum wages meant that things cost more. Lumber, buildings, everything, all the raw materials cost more. And so then the housing was costing more. And so they were just basically what I call it is monopoly money. They were creating this artificially inflated market over there that was going to pop, and it created a real crunch on the individuals that live there because they may have bought in a house for $150,000, and now because of this inflation that's going on with this minimum wage being boosted up is $500,000. So they're having to pay taxes on a $500,000 house. They simply can't afford it. And so in order to save their house, the government, by a proposition, imposed that they can't raise taxes. Now, what they found is California could no longer balance its budget because they weren't getting the tax revenue that they needed. So 2 years ago, in 2022, they passed Proposition 19, which says you can raise those taxes back up to the fair market value as soon as the individual owning that house dies and it's not used as a residence for a direct descendant. So the government keeps creating these problems and then trying to find solutions for these problems. But what would happen is somebody has a farm or a ranch, a family ranch, and they're paying these artificially low taxes on the ranch, and then they pass away and it gets split up among the family members, and the family members, they simply can't afford even to pay the taxes on it because it's just so high because of this artificial inflation that they've caused. So they keep causing one problem after another, and this all goes down to one point, and that is when the government gets involved, it creates more problems than it solves.
Aren't most laws just fixes for previous laws? I mean, I thought, there's 2,000 some odd laws that they create in Arizona every year, and most of them just fix what they did last year.
Yeah, and they do a terrible job doing it.
Yeah.
There's a good example of Medicaid trying to do that. So Medicaid provides long-term care services for individuals who can't afford it. And there are certain assets that are countable towards this $2,000 threshold for qualifying for Medicaid, and there's certain non-countable resources. For example, a non-countable resource would be your house, up to $550,000 of value, and that's the assessor's value. So truly we're looking at probably $750,000 house that is non-countable in determining whether or not this individual should qualify for the $2,000 threshold asset limit for Medicaid. Another thing that's not counted is a vehicle. It doesn't matter if it's a $130,000 Model S Plaid, right? It doesn't count. And other things that Medicaid has done to try to fix this is they said, well, what we'll do is when it goes through probate, then we will do an estate recovery. So whatever the state has paid out of its pocket to pay for these individuals' benefits, we can recover back from the estate. And they only do that through probate. Well, what we do is we avoid probate. We prepare estate planning for individuals that are fed up with the government putting their finger in the pie, and we avoid the government as much as legally possible to transfer wealth from one generation to the next. So what Arizona did, because the assets of our clients don't go through, and not just our clients, any clients that do trust planning don't go through probate, they created another law that said, well, okay, we can't do estate recovery because the house doesn't go through probate. So any house or car which would otherwise be non-countable that goes into a trust, we're going to count it as cash. So that person, whether it's a shack or a $750,000 pretty nice establishment, that's going to count as cash, so you're disqualified from Medicaid. That is really counterintuitive. We're going to punish you for getting your affairs in order and having planning done for your family to avoid this long, drug-out court process called probate, and we're not going to give you benefits if you've done that good planning.
Wow.
And so what it has done is it's had a negative effect on the state, and I'll tell you why. So what we can do then is, let's say that we've got a couple, right? Thomas, you and your wife, you need Medicaid. And you come in, and let's say that you've got $200,000 in the bank account and a house worth $200,000, okay? So you come in and you apply for Medicaid, and there is a rule that a spousal exemption is 1/2 of the total countable assets. Okay, remember, house is not countable unless it's in a trust. So what do? I put your house in a trust. So I take what would not be countable, your house, and just your countable assets being $200,000, and I put it all into a trust. Now it's $400,000 estate.
Essentially inflated the estate.
Yes. And so then we apply, you get the benefit. No, first of all, what happens is you get denied. And that happens almost every time for every Medicaid application. So those of you that are applying, just know that. But you get denied. But we ask them to give us a full analysis of the financial situation and tell us what it would take to qualify. Why exactly are we disqualified, and what it'll take to qualify, which they must provide. And so they provide this analysis. They say you have $400,000, and until you spend down half of that, only half is exempt, then you can't qualify for the Medicaid benefits. So putting the house out of the trust back into your name is the equivalent of purchasing a house with that made up $200,000 that they invented as being part of your house. And so you've just purchased a non-countable asset with that, and now you meet the qualifications. And so somebody who would otherwise only have $200,000 of countable assets and be able to save $100,000 of it can save double that. And so now the state is trying to worm their way around that. Well, we don't like trust, and we don't like you putting things in and out of trust to artificially inflate the spousal exemption. Well, then why'd you create the dumb law in the first place? All I'm doing is following your rules. And so again, like Cody said, most laws are a bandage on bad laws that have been made in the past. So my argument for the most part is the government should stay out of my way unless they're protecting our country and protecting my rights as designated in the Constitution, which is everything. I hold all rights, and some of them are enumerated in the Bill of Rights, but not nearly all of them. And unless the government is doing that specifically, then they ought to stay out of our way unless there's a really good argument for it. So I start at the end that the government is bad, and anything they do is going to be either corrupt or highly unsuccessful in the long run. Adam, what's your take on that?
I agree. I snickered to myself that you said that the government is bad inherently, like it's evil. I don't think so. The government is made up of individuals, and those individuals have motives, and it's hard to be not biased when you're making decisions. The challenge comes when you have this collective mentality that we're better than you, or it's the ultimate power trip. And when you have a government agency acting in that manner, it's like the saying, Vegas always wins. You know, the house always wins. When you go to Vegas, you're most likely not going to win. That's the impression I get. Is it impossible? No. But through my experience, it's very difficult to win against a government entity when they have you in the sights. All sorts of stuff comes up, and they start digging and to try and get a remedy from an agency coming after you, or the government, if you will. I don't have a lot of faith that that person's gonna win that battle, but I think I agree with most of what you said. I like to think there are good people in government, but there's so many people in government that there might be one or two or three, or even if there's a third of the people that are good and understand the idea of the Constitution, how it works, and how government should function, they're going to be overshadowed by those other 2/3, and the other 2/3 are going to ultimately dictate how that agency or that branch of government is going to be handled. So,
well, and
it's super pessimistic.
Well, I think it's human nature, though, to grow whatever institution you participate in. We participate in a law firm, and we are constantly looking for ways to make it more efficient and produce more. And same thing with your family. When you're in your family and you have children and you grow, and that is human nature. If you have one car already, it's human nature to quickly become discontent with it and look for another car. So when people are in government, their sole source of identity and importance and income is control over policies of the people. So if they make and identify that the people are pretty much self-sufficient and I really don't need to do a whole lot, they're arguing themselves out of a job. And that's not human nature.
We got to go to break. This is Life, Death, and the Law. We'll be back.
Coming up, more thought-provoking conversations on life, death, and the law right after this.
Hey, Yuma, Dave Ramsey here. If you listen to our show or know anything about us, then you know I only recommend products and services I trust and I believe in. That's why when it comes to protecting your assets and planning for your loved one's future, you've got to call my friends Shawn Garner and Adam Hansen at the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen. I encourage you to take the first step and attend a free, no-pressure seminar and learn all of your options. The firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen has been educating the Yuma community for over 40 years, and this is the only area of law that they practice. Shawn and Adam believe in giving free education to help people make smart decisions about their assets and help them leave a legacy for their family that they can be proud of. Schedule a free personal consultation today. Call 783-4575 or visit yumaestateplanning.com.
You're listening to Life, Death, and the Law, presented by Beeson, Garner, and Hansen, the law firm that has been voted Yuma's best 6 years in a row.
Welcome back to Life, Death, and the Law. Shawn Garner here, in studio with Adam Hansen, Cody Beeson, and Thomas Sparks. So we're talking about free trade and whether or not it's a good idea. This is something that the two parties agree on. Of all the things that they disagree on, this is something they agree on. And, Trump, he talks about that a lot. Adam, you do the best impression of Trump about talking about China.
No, no, not anymore.
China.
That's not how China.
Okay.
You gotta open the mouth at the end.
All right.
China.
Bait you into it.
And every time he talks about China, he's saying that they're unfair. They're on an unfair playing field. They're not being fair about how they trade with America and with the other countries. And the argument is, well, what is fair? They're dealing with their country the way they see fit. We can deal with our country the way we see fit. But when the government gets in between a bargain between me and you, or me and somebody in another state, or me and another country, they ought to have a really, really good reason. And normally what we've seen is the government's reasons sound good on their surface, but create more problems than they solve.
I was having a conversation with my now 17-year-old. We were driving just over the weekend, and he asked me, what is a monopoly and why is it bad? And so we had that discussion, and in that discussion, I talked about how every country, be it China, United States, Australia, we all have our own labor laws, if you will, and our corporation structures and things like that. And it just happens in the United States that we have antitrust laws that tend to try and break up monopolies. A monopoly would be somebody that, or an organization is so large that it restricts other people coming to market in that particular area. That's my basic definition.
Yeah, it restricts competition. We like competition. We want to foster competition. So if it's so big that competition can never get a foothold, then that is what the antitrust laws are for.
So as we were talking this concept out, I thought to myself, well, and what came out was really the antitrust laws in the United States designed to break up monopolies. One thing comes to mind is Apple. Currently, right now, they're being sued by the federal government to be modified, if you will. They're going to have to do some things that the federal government thrusts upon them, with the idea being that because of what their behavior in the past, which is private behavior, has restricted entry to other upstarts or other companies in that technology realm, and that they're purposely doing that to keep these other companies down. And so the federal government took it upon themselves to say, you're preventing others to come to market, and so we're going to make it where you can't do that. So,
for example, if you send a video into a group chat and 9 of the people on the group chat have iPhones, but one has an Android, that video, their software decreases the quality of the video. So then all the other 9 are like, who's the Android user? Get out of here.
Yeah, and so if you send text messages back and forth to an Android user, the bubble is green.
On them, yeah. Meaning
if it's iPhone is blue, and that's a purposeful thing. And they can control that.
Green's a target. Get that guy out of here.
Yeah, and for some reason, kids these days, it's like the end of the world if you get a green bubble.
Yeah, Android needs to be a protected class of people.
It does, yeah. So those are 2 examples of why the federal government is targeting Apple. The question becomes, should a government do that, or should we allow this to play out? So in this conversation I had with my 17-year-old, I said, really, it's a capitalistic kind of mentality when it comes to monopolies. We want to make it an even playing field for innovation to grow. That would be, in my opinion, a capitalistic type of theory. But yet, what my argument was to my son was that's not, America wasn't founded on capitalism. It was founded on our Constitution, which is a protection against government. We are born with rights. They're God-given, and those rights can be modified or controlled to a certain extent, or let's say reduced or regulated. That's a better word. Regulated to a certain extent by government, but only a little bit. That was the idea of our Constitution. And so this monopoly type idea runs afoul of our Constitution in theory, because now we have a government entity preventing a private individual or citizen from doing whatever they want. It's not hurting anybody else necessarily, physically, so they're not going to be running afoul of any criminal statutes. It's not hurting really anybody, right? What the government's saying is, well, we just don't like what you're doing because we think that you're too big.
Well, and the argument is, this started with the Rockefellers and Standard Oil, and the Vanderbilts with the rail lines, and J.P. Morgan with the banking. And so what was happening is they bought up so much of the market that nobody could compete with them. When that happens, then they can practice an industry standard that is subpar, and even somebody that could come in and do it better, they would go in and quickly either buy out that company, or they would lower their prices so low that the company couldn't compete until they went bankrupt, and then they would raise the prices back up. So then that hurts everybody. It hurts the population that consumes the product or uses a service, and it prevents innovation. And so the government was saying, this entity is acting as a quasi-government. It is so big that we need to protect the people and innovation, so we're going to act as if it's a government in itself, and we're going to break it up to allow the people to have their freedom to continue to contribute to the capitalistic society.
So I understand that. The counter-argument to that is it an outright ban or prevention of innovation, or is it more of a delay of innovation? Meaning, Apple has been operating for many, many years, decades now, and they were fine up to this point. Did that prevent technology from advancing?
Well, the beautiful thing about that story is the irony that is woven in there. Apple wouldn't even exist if the antitrust laws weren't used against Bill Gates and Microsoft. Microsoft had totally destroyed, all but bankrupted Apple. And they said, you are suppressing any competition. You are a monopoly. Unless you can show that there are other viable competitors out there, you are going to have to break up your company and share off or sell off shares. And so Bill Gates calls up Steve Jobs, who were originally partners in the beginning, and said, hey, Steve, I know you can do this. I'm going to lend you, we'll call it $100 million. You are the only person that is capable of reviving a viable competitor in a short period of time, and essentially allowing me to keep my company. And so he revived Steve Jobs, and we have Apple because of antitrust laws.
So I would argue that I think so you take Apple, okay, and you and I, Shawn, we decide we have this wonderful idea. We want to design a phone that does things that haven't been seen before, but we need to kind of borrow some technologies that have been used before by Apple, Microsoft, Google. So we're going to borrow some of those. We're going to pay our licensing fees to do that, but now we're going to put in some new innovation or things that we think that the public will like. Getting that phone to market is going to be very difficult for us without a ton of capital. And so in my ignorant mind, I don't understand, or help me understand, the breaking up of a large company like Apple or Microsoft by the government in order to allow or pave the way for more innovation to come in, when you and I, if we could just raise enough capital and convince enough people, then we should, in theory, be able to now enter market and get our product to that market on, let's say, Kickstarter or some other type of well-known GoFundMe kind of website where people can get involved and they're super excited about this product, and so they start investing in me. Why can't we do that instead of the government being the solution to everything and breaking up Apple?
Yeah, and this is one of the areas that I think that the government does provide some type of equal opportunity, not equity, but equal opportunity. And there's a big difference. And so they allow individuals to come because wealth and knowledge and that base, that huge base that they have of clients, it might take over the world. And it's not hard to imagine a company literally taking over and governing world policies, as we see right now with the World Economic Forum. Right? These are major companies that are doing this. This is not elected officials going to these World Economic Forums. These are huge, multi-billion-dollar companies going to these forums and determining what should be the policy for the whole human race. And I think that is scary, and I think that we need to, for the purpose of freedom, intervene.
Cody, so you've been involved in politics for many years. What did we see? This reminds me of the 2020 election. You see Facebook dumping tons of money into ballot boxes, and you see Apple putting tons of money into certain political candidates and
curbing
lobbyists.
speech on their platforms.
Yeah. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think of the antitrust laws when what happened when Bell and they had to break up the telephone system. I mean, aren't we there with these super wealthy tech companies, Facebook and Instagram? I mean, shouldn't they be broken up into separate organizations?
Yeah.
So there isn't so much power in one group.
See, what I see, Elon Musk, I really admire as far as what he's done and what he's built as industries. What I see, and I'm potentially very, very naive on this, is that although he's built up an incredible industry with EVs, he doesn't suppress the ability of other industries to actually compete with him and against him. In fact, he invites it. And that competition drives him. And he enjoys that competition. At least that's what he portrays, that he does a very good job about it. That is what's admirable, is he's so confident in his ability to keep the edge and that competition will provide better and better products in the future, that he invites it as opposed to quelching it.
Well, I was just going to say, like, look at the contracts that he's getting versus the contracts that like Boeing's getting. You know, he's getting pennies on the dollar versus what these huge organizations or companies are normally getting. I'm talking about like contracts with NASA.
Yeah.
You know, and so he's doing it for a fraction of what the establishment already has.
Yeah. When he's now sending satellites into space for 1,000th of what NASA was doing it before SpaceX became a viable company.
This reminds me of to bring it local, Shawn, you and I and our law firm, we've had these conversations over the course of the years. It's not like we are the only ones in Yuma, Arizona that do the things that we do in this area of law, of estate planning. And so what do we do with our competition? Do we badmouth them? Do we do things like you're talking about? There is a way to deal with competition, and that's to basically stomp them out. Mm-hmm. But over the course of these years, I've been really impressed by your mentality of how to deal with competition and the healthiness that comes from allowing competition in your area of practice, because it causes us to be better. We don't want bad things to happen to other competitors in our market, because we want them to keep us on edge. It not forces us, but it allows us to make the decision to either keep innovating or keep doing better, giving better services, or be stagnant. And so competition is, in my opinion, a good thing. And that's, again, going back to capitalism, that's what it's about, is having that competition in your market to keep you on edge and keep you innovating. In the end, it drives, in my opinion, a better product or a better result for those that are receiving what you're offering as a service or as a product.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal.
I think that DEI is just a subterfuge of hiding true competition and innovation and meritocracy, giving the benefit to the person who deserves it and works hard for it on a global scale. We don't want to give China the business because they were able to do it cheaper, so we're going to provide a tariff. And that's why tariffs in general are bad. When it comes to monopoly, I think there's a different tune, but it's got to get to an extreme point before I think that we can justify any government intervention. And that's where I start. Government is bad until it can make a really, really good argument for intervention, and then fine. But that argument has to start always at the far end of the spectrum.
So your argument, your opinion is that we start with tariffs being bad. Like that's the worst case scenario, is to levy a tariff against another nation.
Not tariffs in general, but government involvement. And if governments are imposing tariffs, then yes, that is a government action, and it starts on the spectrum of you've got to make a darn good argument for why this is happening. This country is going to build up a military that's going to come over and invade our country and make us all communist. Okay, well, you got my attention. Make that argument a little better.
Well, okay.
That's what I'm saying. It's got to be drastic and convincing, but it starts out, government's bad, you've got to convince me otherwise.
But kids work in labor camps, that's not rising to that level? Or what was your ultimate opinion on that?
My ultimate opinion is media. That is the fourth pillar of the government that must exist, and it must disclose what's going on and allow people to make decisions.
So that would be the driving factor. If I find out because the media reports that my iPhone is being made by little children in China,
Yes.
slaving 24 hours a day in a factory.
If that idea repulses you,
Me.
stop buying the phone. Don't make me stop buying the phone. It's
Okay.
just like the socialists out there that say, you're rich, so you should give up your house. Well, the socialists out there preaching it, Bernie Sanders, why don't you give up a few of your houses? You can practice what you preach without forcing your ideology on me, and I'll practice my ideology without forcing it on you. And we'll see at the end which one prevails.
It's a very compelling argument.
That's
Something
all.
to think about.
That's all we have for today. Life, death, and the law. Talk to you next week.
If you have questions or want to know more about something that was discussed today, please call the law firm of Beeson, Garner, and Hansen at 928-783-4575 or visit yumaestateplanning.com.